The 1990s promised freedom for filmmakers, yet many movies were locked away, deemed too volatile for audiences. These weren't just films, they were cultural firestorms, accused of corrupting morals and inspiring violence. But were they truly dangerous, or simply mirrors reflecting the darkness already inside society? Tonight, we count down 12 films banned in the 90s for being too extreme. Natural Born Killers, 1994. When Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers arrived in 1994, marketed as a satire, it told the story of Mickey and Mallory Knox, two young lovers turned mass murderers whose bloody path became a media spectacle. Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis delivered electrifying performances, added manic energy as a tabloid journalist exploiting their crimes. Some praised it as a bold, psychedelic condemnation of America's obsession with celebrity criminals. Others accused it of glamorizing murder. What pushed it into infamy was not only its rapid-fire editing style and unrelenting violence, but the cultural panic that followed. Soon after its release, copycat crimes were allegedly linked to the film. In Louisiana, a couple embarked on a killing spree that their lawyers claimed was inspired by natural-born killers. Lawsuits followed against Stone and Warner Brothers, thrusting the film into courtrooms as well as theaters. Whether fair or not, it became a scapegoat for society's fears about media influence. Censors reacted strongly. The UK demanded heavy cuts, that the real target was not violence, but the news outlets turning killers into icons. Today, Natural Born Killers stands as one of the most infamous examples of 90s censorship. It's remembered less as a film and more as a cultural phenomenon, one that dared to expose society's dark fascination with blood and spectacle, yet was silenced for reflecting it too well. Man Bites Dog, 1992. Belgium gave the 1990s one of its most startling, unnerving films, Man Bites Dog. It masqueraded as a mockumentary about a serial killer, followed by a camera crew. What began as a satirical critique of media complicity spiraled into one of the most controversial releases of the decade. A charming killer named Ben, played by Benoit Poelvoorde, takes a documentary crew along as he murders victims, but as a statement on media's appetite for brutality. Critics praised its artistry. It won the International Critics, but backlash followed quickly. Britain banned it for years, fearing it would desensitize audiences, while several European countries delayed its release. The controversy wasn't just about violence, but about how violence was shown, and disturbingly comedic. The film's most infamous sequences, family massacres, assaults, and chillingly casual conversations about body disposal, its satirical intent was praised by some, condemned by others who claimed satire was just a cover for indulgence. Despite its bans, Man Bites Dog gained an underground following among cinephiles. It wasn't the gore that lingered, but the uncomfortable reflection it offered. What role does the audience play in consuming violence? The answer was too unsettling for many in the 1990s, making it both a banned artifact and a masterpiece of dark commentary. The Exorcist, 1973. Though William Friedkin's The Exorcist was first released in 1973, its shadow stretched into the 1990s. Ireland refused to allow screenings well into the 90s. In the UK, the film was unavailable on home video for nearly 15 years, with the ban lifted only in 1999. Why did it endure such long-lasting censorship? Upon release, audiences fainted, vomited, and fled theaters. Even decades later, authorities worried it would cause public harm. The infamous possession scenes, levitation, convulsions, and violent outbursts were considered far too intense for home viewing. By the 90s, bootleg copies circulated widely. Young audiences who hadn't even been alive in 1973 knew of The Exorcist as the scariest film ever made, even though they weren't allowed to see it. The UK's eventual decision to release it in 1999 signaled a cultural shift, and censors recognized that society had survived far worse shocks. But in the 90s, The Exorcist remained a ghostly absence, a film whispered about, desired, and feared. Its long ban speaks to cinema's power, but to terrify authorities into thinking it could unravel the moral fabric of society. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978, Though originally released in the late 1970s, I Spit on Your Grave remained one of the most hotly contested films of the 1990s because of its reclassification battles. In Britain, the so-called video nasties panic had already placed it on banned lists throughout the 80s. The film tells the story of a woman brutally attacked and left for dead, who later exacts revenge on her tormentors. Supporters argued it was an uncompromising tale of survival and retribution. In the UK, the British Board of Film Classification flatly refused to grant it a certificate through most of the 90s. Australia and New Zealand also kept it banned, considering it beyond the pale for theatrical or home release. By the end of the 90s, I Spit on Your Grave had become both a feminist rallying cry for some and a cautionary tale for others. Its bans weren't merely censorship. Straw Dogs, 1971. Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs was already infamous upon release in 1971, but by the 1990s, it had become one of the most contested films in censorship history. Starring Dustin Hoffman as a quiet academic pushed into brutal violence in rural England, the film was shocking, not just for its intensity, but for how it forced audiences to question human nature. Throughout the 80s and deep into the 90s, Straw Dogs was effectively banned in the UK. The controversy centered around its depiction of violence and the raw, claustrophobic atmosphere that Peckinpah used to trap audiences in a moral nightmare. He wanted to explore the thin line between civility and savagery, forcing viewers to ask, when pushed, what are we capable of? In Britain, attempts to re-release the film in the 90s met fierce resistance. It wasn't until later that heavily cut versions began to emerge, robbing the movie of its raw power. For cinephiles, this censorship became part of its legend. By the time the ban was finally lifted at the end of the decade, Straw Dogs had become a symbol of how cinema could ignite controversy long after its initial release. It showed that sometimes what terrifies authorities most isn't gore, but the confrontation of uncomfortable truths about human nature. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange is perhaps the most famous case of a film banned, not by government decree, but by its own director. After its release in 1971, the film immediately became a cultural flashpoint. By the 1990s, its legend was enormous, because in the UK, audiences still couldn't legally watch it. The controversy stemmed from its disturbing mix of stylized violence, social satire, and unforgettable imagery. Was magnetic and terrifying. Kubrick's vision was simultaneously dazzling and horrifying. When a handful of violent crimes in Britain were allegedly linked to copycat behavior from the film, the backlash was swift. Fearing for his family's safety and exhausted by the constant media attacks, Kubrick himself requested Warner Brothers to withdraw the film from UK distribution. His decision kept it locked away for nearly 3 decades. By the 1990s, bootleg VHS copies were passed around secretly, often poor in quality, but enough to sustain the film's mystique. Critics and fans abroad discussed its brilliance, while British audiences were left in frustration, building its myth into something larger than life. Internationally, it was praised as a cinematic masterpiece, but in its home country, it was a forbidden fruit. When Kubrick passed away in 1999, Warner Brothers finally prepared for a re-release in 2000. A Clockwork Orange remained the ultimate symbol of a film too controversial for its own time, banned not by law, but by fear itself. The 1990s only deepened its legend, proving that sometimes absence makes a film even more dangerous than presence. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ may not have been as graphically violent as other films on this list, but its controversy was seismic, reaching into the 1990s with bans that held strong across the globe. What made it too extreme was not gore, but the very subject matter, a radical reimagining of the life of Jesus Christ. Upon release in 1988, protests erupted worldwide. In the US, cinemas screening it were picketed. One theater was even firebombed by extremists. By the 1990s, many countries still refused to allow its distribution. Chile, Mexico, Greece, and the Philippines all kept it banned. In Ireland, the film was prohibited until the late 90s. The controversy centered on its portrayal of Jesus as a man grappling with temptation, including moments of doubt, fear, and human desire. For religious authorities, this was blasphemy. It was an exploration of faith made deeper by acknowledging struggle. Willem Dafoe's performance as Jesus and Harvey Keitel as Judas gave the film a raw edge, far from traditional biblical epics. Detractors condemned it as sacrilegious and dangerous. By the 1990s, the bans surrounding The Last Temptation of Christ symbolized a larger battle over artistic freedom versus religious sanctity. Even in an era that prided itself on progress, the film remained chained by outrage. Its place at the top of this list is a reminder that extremity is not always measured in blood or violence.